Hello, my name is Catherine, and I want to welcome you to an Introduction to Henry VI, Part 2. In Part 1 of this video intro, we cover the events leading up to the opening of Henry VI, Part 2. In this video, we'll finish looking up who's who, and then move on to what's what during the play itself. To do that, it is essential that I show you the Plantagenet family tree. Even Shakespeare, who normally makes little or no effort to distinguish between his plethora of geographically named nobles, makes an exception in Act 2, Scene 2 of this play. So pay attention when the Duke of York explains his lineage. The first thing you will notice about any noble family tree from this era is that somebody should have invented a baby name book a lot sooner. If you were a boy at birth and lucky, your mother, or more likely your father, would have named you after a king, Richard, Edward, or Henry. But if you were named Edmund, George, John, or Humphrey, well, you might as well beam down to the planet in a red shirt. Either way, you or one of your brothers were likely to also be named after your father. If you were born a girl, well, let's face it, in this time period they were pretty much all unlucky, and likely to be named Elizabeth, Margaret, Eleanor, Isabel, Anne, Mary, or occasionally some variant of Catherine. The second thing to note about English nobility family trees is that they are all oversimplified. Even this one. When you have 10 or 12 children and many of them die young or childless, they don't always make it onto the chart. So we're going to start simple and we'll add in names as we go on. We already know from Part 1 that Richard II and Henrys 4, 5, and 6 are both descended from Edward III. Richard is from the first surviving son, Edward the Black Prince, and the Henrys are from John of Gaunt, the third son. Gaunt was the Duke of Lancaster, so his descendants became known as Lancastrians, and they were marked by a red rose on their heraldic badges. One of the reasons that King Henry IV and V and VI had so many rebellions, even after Richard II mysteriously died in prison, was that by claiming the English throne illegally, King Henry IV bypassed the second son and his heirs, including the Duke of York's grandfather, Roger Mortimer, the 4th Earl of March. When Richard II died childless, then the Mortimers should have inherited the throne. This branch of the family, because they married into the York family also, became to be known as the Yorks and were marked by a white rose on their heraldic badges. So let's go back and take a closer look. Edward III actually had 7 sons, 5 of whom managed to survive long enough to get to adulthood. So the first son is Edward the Black Prince, named because he was so fierce, and his son, Richard II. The third son, there's John of Gaunt and the line of Henrys, and in between them we see Lionel of Antwerp, so named because he was born in Antwerp in modern-day Belgium. He's also the Duke of Clarence. He had a daughter, no sons, but she got married and she had a son, there's Roger Mortimer. And then Anne, the great-granddaughter, married Richard of Cambridge, and they had the Duke of York. Richard of Cambridge, by the way, was one of the 3 executed by Henry V in Henry V. Now, the 2 Richards here, Richard Cambridge and Richard Duke of York, are also found over here, and we can trace them back up to the 4th branch of the family. The 5th branch is Thomas of Gloucester, and their descendants include the Staffords and the Buckinghams. Before we get back to the story in our play, let's take a look at another family tree here. This one is simplified. It only has the 3rd son, the 4th son, and the 2nd son of Edward III, and we're going to see if we can fit some of the other characters in play in here. So let's go back to Henry VI, and we have the line up to John of Gaunt, and we can see if we go up to Henry V, he had a younger brother, Humphrey, Duke of Gloucester. This is actually his 3rd youngest brother. The other 2 were killed in the 100 Years' War. In fact, we saw one of the brothers, Duke of Bedford, killed in Henry VI, Part 1. So Gloucester is the only remaining brother, and he's the uncle here to Henry VI, and he is made Lord Protector of England and one of Henry's regents. He also raised Henry VI. And since Henry VI does not yet have any sons, then Gloucester is the next in line to inherit the throne. Going further up the chart, back to John of Gaunt, we see he had a mistress, Catherine Swynford, with which he had 4 children, 3 of whom are pictured here. They were all born out of wedlock, although they were later legitimized when he married his wife. But because they were born bastards, they were not allowed to inherit the throne. We see here the Cardinal Winchester, and also Edmund Beaufort, the Duke of Somerset, two characters in our upcoming play. And this entire bastard line is known as the Beauforts, which you can kind of get a sneak peek of where we're going with this line here. Next, let's take a look at the Neville branch of the family. Siding with York are Richard Neville, the 5th Earl of Salisbury, and Richard Neville, the 16th Earl of Warwick, also known as the Kingmaker, because they can trace their family history up to Joan of Beaufort, back to John of Gaunt. They are associated with the Lancasters, but they can also trace by marriage a line here to the Duke of York, when the Duke of York married the sister of the Earl of Salisbury. They are thus smack in the middle and uniquely placed to play both sides, which will be a factor in the next play and will make for some interesting marriages as well. So let's get back to our story. When the Lancasters usurped the throne, Roger Mortimer could not do anything about it at the time, and his cries of, "But I should be king," went largely unheard, probably because he was only 7 years old at the time. But English nobility have long memories, and Mortimer's family and his descendants continued to protest and rebel against the throne, including his brother, his son, and his brother-in-law, all of whom ended up either being executed or otherwise killed in battle. They will, of course, have some success further down the line here. But for now, the current Mortimer heir is the Duke of York, and unlike his ancestors, York decides to keep his cards close to his chest and plot more carefully in hopes of keeping his head attached to his shoulders. York's biggest rival is the Duke of Somerset of the bastard Beaufort line here. Somerset and York disagree about many things, including who should be next in line for the throne, the management of the wars in France, and Somerset knows that the York family, of course, has a history of rebelling against his family. Richard, the Duke of York, does not want to make the same mistakes as his ancestors, but he's more than willing to jump into bed with Margaret and Suffolk, figuratively speaking, of course, when they want to imprison and then murder Gloucester and banish his wife Eleanor, nicknamed Nell, because that puts the Duke of York one step closer to the throne. But then Margaret and Suffolk want to get rid of the Duke of York as well. First, they try to send York to France, but York says, "No, Somerset will simply sabotage my efforts." So they send Somerset to France instead. And then when they need someone to quell a rebellion in Ireland, they think, "Oh, we'll send York there," hoping he'll get killed. But York is one step ahead of them, and he says, "Sure, I'll go to Ireland, but I'll need an army." Guess where this is going? So Richard, the Duke of York, quietly plots a coup of his own. In the meantime, he wants to make sure that there is enough popular support for an uprising. So in the year 1450, he hires a Trumpian puppet, Jack Cade, to incite a people's rebellion, kind of a proof of concept to see if people are ready for a new king. So Jack Cade pretends to be a long-lost heir of Mortimer, and then he goes on a destructive spree. He gathers commoners, disgruntled with the status quo, including our characters of Beavis and Holland and the Smith the Weaver and Dick the Butcher and Michael. And they know he's a fraud. They know he's telling lies, and yet they still follow him. Sound familiar? They capture London Bridge. They attack the Tower of London, despite efforts by the mayor and the heroic Matthew Goff, an actual historical figure, though his only job in this play is to come on stage and be killed before speaking a single line. The mostly uneducated masses seem to be in it as much for the looting and the rioting and the chance to kill all the lawyers and drain the swamp and make crazy rules, as well as for any real social change. They will kill Lord Say, the treasurer, and his son-in-law, the sheriff of Kent. They'll even kill one of their own supporters, who simply happens to call Jack Cade by the wrong name. In fact, these people will follow anyone who shouts the loudest or makes the fanciest speech, so eventually they are persuaded by Buckingham and Clifford to abandon Cade and stand down. We also see all of these power struggles and quest for justice by the nobles mirrored throughout the play in subplots among the commoners, such as between the armorer Thomas Horner and his apprentice Peter Thump over a treasonous comment, or in the money-grabbing charlatan acts of Simon Simcox and his wife. Even the witchcraft scene, where Buckingham persuades Priest Hume to involve the Duchess Eleanor in magic, so that she can be arrested for treason, plays this theme of justice, because even though it's all a setup, all of the spirit's prophecies manage to come true. But will justice actually be served in the end? And will King Henry ever act like a real king? He does banish Suffolk after Salisbury and Warwick prove Suffolk and the Cardinal guilty of murdering the Honourable Duke of Gloucester. And Suffolk has a tearful, but it's true love, goodbye scene with Margaret. And he'll meet his fate by water, or is it Walter, and be killed by pirates, and he won't come back to life. That's a different movie. And the corrupt cardinal will die of a guilty conscience, and a starving and abandoned Jack Cade will be killed by the new sheriff of Kent, Alexander Iden, after Cade ordered the death of the last one, though ironically Iden won't know who his enemy is until later. But what about York's claim to the throne, and his feud with Somerset and Margaret's remaining Lancastrian allies, Clifford and Buckingham, who is Suffolk's cousin? Well, Act 5 opens in the year 1453 and continues through 1455 in the town of St. Albans, about 20 miles northwest of London. York is bringing his army back from Ireland to try and arrest Somerset, who effectively ended the 100 Years' War by losing everything except for the coastal town of Calais in France. Buckingham is sent by King Henry to let the Duke know that Henry's imprisoned Somerset in the Tower of London just to be safe. But when York finds out that Margaret has released Somerset from prison, verbal diplomacy breaks down into bigger army diplomacy, and York army routs the Lancastrians from St. Albans. York also kills Clifford, the Lancastrian lord, and then we see the first glimpse of York's son, the future King Richard III, as that younger Richard kills Somerset. And since Shakespeare's prophecies always come true, Somerset, who was foretold to avoid castles, will meet his end under the sign of the Castle Inn. Part 2 thus ends with a cliffhanger to see who will make it to London first, York or Lancaster, to sit on the throne. Don't worry if you can't keep track of everything on the first pass. You're not meant to. Nobody is. Just roll with the flow and accept that even if you don't get all the details this time around, the big picture, the story, is still fascinating and profoundly relevant for today's modern audiences. The story will also continue in Part 3, where the War of the Roses will take place in earnest. We will see Margaret leading the armies of England. The crown will switch sides and switch hands multiple times. Warwick will set up yet another marriage with yet another French heiress. These people never learn. And be betrayed with disastrous results. Henry will go insane, and more heads will roll. I hope you can join me for this play, and the one after, and the one after that, and the one after that, because I find them fascinating and I uncover more details every time I read through them. Either way, just remember to play's the thing. Thank you, and good night.